homeschooling a child without losing your mind, it's incredibly important, because if you lose your mind when you're homeschooling, your child is also going to lose her mind. So I wanted to make this video today to talk about some best practices and just to offer some support for those of you that are endeavoring to homeschool at any time, but especially during these times that seem so strange. Some of us have found ourselves in a situation like me, in which you weren't planning on homeschooling necessarily, but you adapted a homeschooling approach to your child's education because it seemed most suitable for your child's style, possibly because you had concerns about how the environment was going to be in your child's public or private school system. I wanted to address some of these concerns. First and foremost, when it comes to homeschooling your child, I think that everybody can agree that patience is key. As a parent, most likely you know that patience can be very difficult. Expecting to be patient while you're homeschooling your child is a big ask. It's a big ask even for parents who are patient as parents. Being patient as a teacher parent, it looks a little bit different. It looks a little bit more challenging. Remember that patience takes practice. Moving toward the goal is a better approach than thinking that you're just going to have the patience of a saint when you sit down to homeschool your child. It's very difficult to play both roles, to play the role of the teacher, the mentor, and also of the parent. It's a new concept, it's a new feeling, a new experience for many of us. So have patience with yourself first. Be able to establish that before you can expect yourself to be able to display patience as your child struggles through learning. Remember that you are new in this role for those of you who are. So remember that patience takes practice. And just cut yourself some slack. One thing that I found really helpful for my daughter is that at the beginning of the day, we work together to construct what the plan for the day looks like. I have a little tiny chalkboard that I have on my wall, which I put there with some chalk paint, which was very inexpensive. And I just list out 4 to 5 activities that we'll be doing for the day. This is a great moment in the morning to kind of gather up together and to work together toward putting something on the board so that she can see what's in store. This approach won't be helpful for every student. Some students actually, I think, don't necessarily need to see what they're doing for the day. Some days my daughter seems to function better when there isn't a plan on the board, but some days she does. So reading your child is important, right? Trying to determine based on the morning's activities. Our morning activities like chores, outdoor play, having breakfast, having some connection before we start homeschool, I try to read her. Is today going to be a day in which she would benefit from having a plan on the board? Every day is different. Every human is different every day. So kind of gauge what your child is like that day and what you perceive as her needs or his needs or their needs. So usually there's some kind of schedule on the board. I think it's very important to make sure that children feel like they have power in a lot of ways, but first and foremost in what they're learning. When you're homeschooling, especially as a parent, teacher, mentor, kids need to feel like they're not being disempowered. There's always so much of a negotiation of power in a parent-child relationship anyway, but then you add in the teacher-mentor facet, and you begin to see almost immediately that it's very, very, very tense, or at least it has the potential to be really tense. Make sure that you are giving your child a sense of power. I like to let my daughter select 1 or 2 activities or subjects for the day that she is feeling interested in. So for example, if on the lesson plan in the unit, I'm planning on doing the hero's journey as part of a language arts, then I might ask her, might you be more interested in examining the storyline in Mulan or in Shrek, or in The Grinch Who Stole Christmas today. Little things like that even can give a child a sense of power and authority in her own learning so that she feels like it's being driven a bit by her needs. Another example is the other day I said, just go and choose any text from our homeschooling library that you feel drawn toward today. Bring it to me and we'll, examine it and we'll create an activity to do together based on that. Every day it can look different. Giving your child a sense of control over her own learning, it's going to make him feel more invested in what he's learning. So keep that in mind. Power is important, right? It doesn't have to be all power coming from you and being enforced upon the child. Another way that you can give the child a sense of power is to have the child teach you some things. So for example, instead of you always speaking to her about the learning lesson, children actually oftentimes already know at least something, some piece of whatever lesson is on the table. That might not always be the case, but often it will be. So engaging your child and allowing her to teach you a portion or a piece is really exciting for a lot of kids. They feel like they're knowing something and that they can share it with you. And that allows the student or child to become like the teacher in a way. And that's a nice negotiation of power. When you're a parent and you're a teacher / mentor, it's really important that you set boundaries for your child's misbehavior. I guarantee you there's going to be plenty of it. And you're going to feel overwhelmed, most likely, with some of their behaviors. Some of their shows of frustrations can make you feel really overwhelmed. Having that in mind when you come to homeschooling is helpful. Having a set of things that you will do when your child is whining or crying about not being able to do the work, that she doesn't understand it. She might even say things like, I hate myself, I hate this work, I hate math, I'm horrible at math. These are some things that children might say when they become very frustrated. So it's important to think about how you're going to handle this and to have a set of tools at your fingertips always when you sit down to homeschool, so that you can draw from those to help yourself, so that you can help your child. Some of the things that I do is I have out a confidence book for my daughter. She's 8 years old currently in 3rd grade. I make sure that on the table I have a confidence book, a confidence workbook. I have an anger management book. Sometimes though, when I pull those out, it makes her more angry or more frustrated. Other times she feels really open to maybe doing a page in the workbook or reading a chapter in the book and discussing it. Other times I have to give consequences. And those consequences, they always look different and they always match what is going on in the home classroom. An example is just this morning. We were doing a math project on money that really frustrated my daughter, and she got really angry. She took her pencil and she said, I just want to stick this in your ear. And I was like, go ahead and see what happens. So she did. So I said, well, after this session in math, unfortunately, I'm going to have to extend. I'm going to have you do some research on the ear. And I took out the Smithsonian Encyclopedia and I had her look at the section on the ear and the parts of the ear. And I had her write out 5 facts about the ear using complete sentences, making sure that she got her capitalization and her S's correct. And then I left her in the kitchen to do that by herself. Perhaps that's not the best consequence. There are certainly ways to pick that apart. But I think that the idea is that you want to make sure that you're giving your child consequences that suit the kind of misbehavior or the attitude that they're throwing at you, so that you feel as if you are addressing it and your child feels like you're addressing it. I think that's really important, right? I also give myself some timeouts if it's getting really excessive with talking back and expressing frustration. There's only so much I can handle. So I'll say, I need to step away from this learning activity for a moment, and I'll go in my room, I'll close the door, put on some music, do some meditation for 5 minutes or whatever, and then come back. Try to keep the learning space as pristine as possible in terms of your intention, no matter what that might look like for you to get back into a space of mental clarity. So take care of yourself by setting boundaries. Remember when you're teaching a new skill that you have to scaffold those skills. Those of you who are new to homeschooling, you might have expectations of your child's knowledge set that isn't actually reflective of their real knowledge set. I've discovered this has been true for me, because I expected that in the 3rd grade, for example, my daughter would know how to round numbers or would know the hundreds place value system, for example. I soon found out that this wasn't the case. When you want to teach a skill like multi-digit addition or subtraction, they have to have already other skills in place, foundational skills that will allow them to complete the task that you're giving them. So when I think of a task, for example, we are working toward multiplication this year. If by the end of the year she has multiplication, I'll be really, really happy. But I have to think back a step and then back another step and back another 10 steps in order to say, well, in order to get her to multiplication, she first has to know X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D. She's not a master of those yet. So let's scale back and see how I can scaffold multiplication by dealing with those smaller lead-up kind of skills. Think about scaffolding for every skill that you're trying to teach your child, because they can feel really overwhelmed if you just give them something that you expect from them, something that's a goal skill, without allowing them to climb the ladder to get to that skill. So think about how you can scaffold. One fabulous tool that I like to use in my toolbox of homeschool teaching is workbooks. Workbooks are easy to utilize because they have the fresh assignments written out, and it's more or less a kind of fill-in-the-blank approach. So workbooks have their appeal for sure, and I like to use them as I'm using a number of other approaches to learning. But if you sit your child down and you take out that workbook and you put it in front of her, almost guaranteed she's going to feel some anxiety and panic when she sees that workbook laid before her. One way to address that is make sure that before you introduce a workbook or an activity like that you've already had a discussion or a lesson or a segment in which you've already explored the topic matter that's in the workbook. If we're doing a workbook page on similes, I make sure that beforehand we've already had a casual conversation going back and forth where we're slinging similes at each other and we're talking about similes and we're bringing in examples so that when she sees the workbook, she already feels confident. Right, I know what a simile is. I can do this. This is no problem. You want your child to feel like that when you give them a high anxiety assignment like that. Workbooks might not be anxiety inducing for your child. That's just an example of mine. But whatever it is that causes anxiety, think about how you can introduce something in a more conversational way before you give them the big assignment, right? That way they'll feel confident. You want to make sure when you're homeschooling that you utilize your time well. The school day is many hours longer. A traditional school day is many hours longer than the kind of time you're going to want to spend in the home classroom. The home classroom takes a lot less time for teaching and exploration because it's so centered on the child that the child ends up being able to extract a lot more of that information, ostensibly, from the lesson. And you're focused on that child. So the amount of learning that you can do in a shorter period of time is really intensified in homeschooling versus traditional schooling environments. So keep that in mind. Another way that you want to utilize your time well is to think in an interdisciplinary, intertextual way. And what that means is when you're teaching one subject, you can easily draw in other subjects that are related to whatever it is that you're exploring so that you can hit language arts, geography, and physics in like a 10-minute circle because you're making connections between what you're learning, for example, about the hero's journey and what you've been learning, for example, about Ghana. So you've got your World Atlas at one elbow, you've got your paperwork, your poster that you made about the hero's journey on the other elbow, and you're going to tie in something about physics at the same time. So you're not keeping your subjects in a vacuum. Instead, what you're doing is you're showing an interconnectedness between disciplines. And this is a wonderful tool for kids as they move forward in their education at any level, and even for adults. But it helps you so much as a homeschooler because you're hitting multiple subjects at one time, and you're limiting the amount of time, which is already short, that you're spending in the homeschool classroom. Some kids need a lot of mentoring in their schooling, while others are much more independent. But I think it's important to establish with your child that it's important to have both facets of being a student. A student who's independent is a student, obviously, who can work well by herself and can do independent research and can explore on her own, that's a fabulous strength. But also being in need or being accepting of mentoring or of working in a group mentality is also important. And as a teacher, I think it's important to balance those two things. If your student shows anxiety when you leave her alone to do a workbook page, for example, perhaps you stay. And at the beginning of the session, you stay by her side. Then maybe after the first 20 minutes of homeschool, you say, I'm going to get up and leave the room for 5 minutes. I'll be back. I know that you can do this work. Let me know if you need any help. And you begin to have a back and forth when you're present and you're there and you're mentoring, and then when you remove yourself and you expect the child to work independently. And you play with this a bit, right? You see what is functional for your child, which subjects she feels comfortable working on independently and which ones she needs some help. And fostering this idea that both approaches to education are good. There's not one that's better than the other, but you're practicing both in the classroom. Understanding how your child will react to praise is something that I have learned is incredibly important if you have a perfectionist-minded kind of child. At the beginning of my homeschooling experience, I would constantly praise my daughter, always saying things like, you're doing such a great job with that addition problem. I know that addition has been really hard for you, and I'm really liking what I'm seeing. After a couple weeks, she would just turn to me and say, I really hate it when you speak to me like that. It makes me feel so ridiculous. Could you just stop speaking to me like that? And I was like, what I wouldn't love to be praised. Like if I were her, I would want to be praised. Every child is different. When your child speaks something like that to you, it's important that you listen. Now, when she does a really good job, I hold back my praise and I try to, I also like to allow my daughter to dictate her own breaks. A lot of times, learning from a parent at home in a formal learning kind of way can be really overwhelming for kids, just as much as it is for us to be their teachers sometimes. So allowing kids to say when they need a break and honoring that request is really important. Of course, every kid's break is going to look different. Some kids might want to watch a quick YouTube video if you allow them to use technology. Another kid might just want to grab a quick snack and a drink of water. That's usually what my kids' break looks like. Another kid might want to go outside and run around. You know your child better than any child, but we all need breaks, especially when we're being asked to hold so much in our brains, so much in our bodies. It's nice to give them as many breaks as they need. That's one of the wonderful liberties of teaching from home. So let your child's learning experience be as organic as possible. Finally, realize that part of the homeschooling process for you as a teacher parent is to honor your need for self-care and to honor your need for staying motivated. It can be really difficult. I've seen a lot of parents begin homeschooling really with a lot of energy and a lot of drive, and they're feeling really wonderful about it. And within a week, right, they're sitting in a chair with their hand in their head and they're like, I can't go on. And they don't. You have to be able to sustain the role that you've decided to play in your child's life. You owe it to your child and you owe it to yourself, right, to follow through on the things that you want to do. It makes you feel good when you do that. And it makes your child feel good to see that you're able to do that. So how do you do it? You must take care of yourself. And that means listening to what your needs are, identifying those needs, and for the love of Goddess, giving them to yourself. That might look like skipping a day of homeschooling. It might look like lying in bed for the whole day and having homeschooling from your bed. It might look like being very creative about what counts as homeschooling activities so that they fit into your life more easily. It also looks like flexibility. Knowing, for example, that you have a goal today of addressing 3-digit addition, but not being really rigid in how you get there. So it can take a number of paths. It can zigzag for you to get to where you need to go, right? Because this is not just learning, this is life. And it's important to recognize that life is not a straight and narrow path. And neither is learning. So you need to break down this idea that in order to learn well, you must stick to a plan, or you must, go from a straight line between A and B. it isn't like, life isn't like that, and neither is learning. So getting rid of that illusion, breaking down that fantasy can really serve you. Knowing what you struggle with personally as a person. We're parents, and when you're homeschooling, you're a formal teacher, but you're also a human being with a lot of needs, a lot of trauma that you're working on in your own journey, triggers that you have. Feeling overwhelmed, feeling defeated is really easy when you're juggling so many different roles. All of us feel that. So taking into consideration what you need. Are you a journaler? If so, then take out a journal and let it help you. Do you like to call your mom when things are getting a little tough? Embrace that. Do you like to leave the house, go out for a walk? If that's safe for your child to stay home with someone, get out there and do that. What are some things that are going to fill your cup? Because unless your cup is filled, you cannot fill the cup and you cannot serve that role for your child. Take care of yourself first and realize that this is a hard job and this is hard work that you're doing, and that it's okay to not be doing things the same way as your homeschooling neighbor, or as, another student who's doing virtual learning through their public school, or your neighbor who's going to a private school. Every learning experience looks different. And that is okay. Embrace your style. Embrace your needs. This is going to strengthen you and really fill you up. That's what you need when you're giving so much to take good care of yourself. I would love to hear any other approaches to homeschooling. Whether you're a seasoned homeschooler or whether you're new to homeschooling like I am, I would love to know some things that you would add to this list, or maybe some things that you would challenge me about in terms of your own experiences. Thanks for watching.